Good evening, and thank you very much for this opportunity to stand before you and talk to the people of the Flathead Valley and, of course, Montanans. I'd like to thank the Interlake and the university as well for this opportunity. Tonight you're going to hear a little bit about competing visions and competing records. And people ask me the question, Denny, why did you run for the United States Senate when you were in the House and you're on a committee, appropriations committee? And I look at them and say, well, what would you do? If you thought the country was heading off in the wrong direction, under the leadership of Barack Obama and Harry Reid and the Senate as it exists, if you saw that government was intruding in our lives more than ever before, if you knew that you had a senator that voted with the president, Barack Obama, 95% of the time, on issues like the Obamacare, which was supposed to be health care reform, but it didn't reform health care, it just added more people to a failing system. If you saw that the government solution was to try and buy our way into prosperity, by spending money, a borrowed $1 trillion on a failed stimulus that didn't create real jobs. If you knew that rather than having a comprehensive energy policy, we had an environmental policy coming out, that in fact, as a result of actions in both the House and the Senate on votes having to do with the EPA, our senator sided with unelected bureaucrats at EPA. He was warned, and unfortunately the Correct plant in Billings is going to shut down. And why does that matter to people in Kalispell? Well, it's going to cost 35 jobs in Billings, but it's going to cost $10 million statewide annually in lost revenue. Money that's sent to Helena to be equalized and sent to places like Kalispell and Columbia Falls and such. And so there's an impact there as well. If you knew you had a Senate that was actually heading off in the wrong direction, what would you do? So we're going to have an opportunity to talk tonight about the real issues, I hope, about real reform and real economic development and a real future for Montana. And I wanted to give Montanans the opportunity to have a contrast of philosophies and a choice in November of a differing avenue or path.
Mr. Cox, go ahead.
Well, it's an honor to be able to stand here and speak in favor of your God-given, unalienable rights. I want to thank you all for coming out and being involved in your government. I think that's super important. I wanted to start with something from the Declaration of Independence. It says, "We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights." And it goes on to say, "To secure these rights, governments were instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed." I really want you to think about that, because that's why we're here today, is the Declaration of Independence. Our founding fathers didn't fight and die in order for our government to take from one person and give to another, to pick one business over another business. There's only one reason why they fought and died for you, and that is to secure your rights. Now, it says that their power comes from the consent of the governed. That means you need to be involved in your government. Are you consenting to this government taking away your rights? Well, I stand before you and I don't consent to what the government is doing. That is why I'm here tonight. Now, if you have no rights, you're essentially slaves. Harriet Tubman had a very unique phrase, and she said, "I freed thousands of slaves, and I could have freed thousands more if they would have only known that they were slaves." I urge you, do not let either of the gentlemen before you back into office, because they've both shown that they are not for your unalienable rights. Thank you.
I want to say, first of all, thanks to Flathead Valley Community College and to the Daily Interlake and the Flathead Beacon. Frank and Kellen, thank you very, very much. Thank all of you for being here. The folks who are watching on the streaming, it's good to have you here. I've got to introduce a few folks tonight that are here. Special folks to me. First of all, my wife, Charlotte, who's been my rock for 35 years. Thanks for being here, hon. And my two, I will emphasize, older brothers. My oldest brother, Dave, sorry about that, Dave, who's here with his wife, Rebecca, their daughter, Kelly, and my brother, Bob, with his wife, Lois. Thank you all for being here. You know, I've lived a very blessed life. I've gotten to farm the land at my grandfather's homestead. I've got to watch my grandparents, but more often my parents helped build a community. And they did that by working together. They built the farm by working with their neighbors, and they built the town of Big Sandy just like many small towns across this state, just like all small towns across this state, by working with their neighbors. And that's a lesson that we could learn in Washington, D.C. I've tried to use that model in my policy making. One of the bills that I've worked very, very hard on is a bill called the Forest Job and Recreation Act that would help this area in a big, big way. It's a bill that took loggers and recreationalists and conservationists and environmentalists, and they all got in the same room together and decided that nobody was winning in our forests. And it was time to really compromise and move forward with a policy for our federal forests that was made here in Montana. And they worked on this solution to really manage our forests in a way that makes sense for everybody here and create jobs in the process. Working together is a Montana value. We've got a lot of work to do in Washington, D.C., and I will tell you that none of it will get done unless we work together. We've got to responsibly cut the debt and the deficit. We've got to protect Social Security and Medicare for generations and generations to come. We have to ensure that women have the right to make their own health care decisions. These are just a few of the jobs that have to be done in Washington, D.C., and it needs to be done by us working together.
Thank you, gentlemen. Over at the far table, the senator introduced Frank Mealy and Kellen Brown. Frank and Kellen will be answering the questions this evening. And again, we did a random drawing as to who would start. The first question will be asked by Mr. Mealy. Gentlemen, I'd like to keep your responses to 90 seconds. And the order is Senator Tester, Mr. Cox, and Congressman Rehberg.
Thank you. Excuse me. Gentlemen, let's begin with a follow-up to your last debate in Billings. Senator Chester, you claimed at that time that the federal stimulus bill provided $500 million in tax relief for working families and small businesses in Montana. That sounds impressive, but what do we have to show for it? Did the money do any good? And given hindsight, would any of you vote for the $800 billion stimulus bill if you could do it over again?
Well, first of all, Frank, thanks for the question. At the time that stimulus bill was passed, as I said in Billings, we were hemorrhaging 800,000 jobs a month and had been for some time. The country was on the verge of a huge depression. Something had to be done. So what did we do? We passed a Recovery Act that basically, I was wrong with the $500 million. It was actually $575 million went to tax reductions for Montanans. Montana workers got $400 taken out of their checks, put back in their checks, I should say. Retired folks got a check for $250. That all helps. It helps create demand, which helps stimulate the economy. Small businesses got $90 million. I'm talking, these are just Montana numbers. These aren't national numbers, just Montana numbers. There was a housing bill in that for first-time homeowners that offered them the ability to achieve the American dream and get into a home. A very, very good program that helped really stimulate this area in a big, big way because we saw the housing market really flatten out in a big way. We're still not where we need to be. But it was a step in the right direction to help move forward. Look, if we're losing 800,000 jobs a month and we passed this Recovery Act, we saw the job loss be eliminated, flattened out, and we're starting to see job growth now. That was critically important to do at that point in time to be able to put people back to work.
Well, you heard mention that it stimulated jobs and to put money back in the pockets of people. I'm all for you getting as much money, not back from the government, but not taking from you in the first place. It's interesting though, we're talking here about housing being sponsored. We just had a housing bubble that just popped, and now we're dumping more money back into it. I think one of the things you have to realize is the government cannot give you something that it didn't steal from somebody else first. I don't think the founding fathers could have ever even dreamed at the taxation level that the American people would be under. Most Americans are over 50% by the time you add up all the different taxation. And I think that it's not government's role to be taking money from you and giving to you because it's supposedly going to stimulate jobs. The government doesn't create jobs. Entrepreneurs create jobs. Demand of services and products creates jobs. You cannot steal from Peter to pay Paul, although you'll probably always get the support of Paul when you're doing that. So, I would like to have a fair government, a safe government, and that's where the government doesn't steal from anybody to give to somebody else or pick favorites.
That was President Obama and Senator Tester's big jobs bill. I didn't vote for it then, and I wouldn't vote for it again. Why? Because we knew it wasn't going to stimulate the economy. You don't buy your way into prosperity. You don't borrow $1 trillion against the future and hope that you can spend it and somehow create an asset. You know, even the Wall Street Journal said 12 cents on the dollar went to something that was stimulative. The other 88 cents on the dollar went to pure spending. Now, when Shannon and I had to make a decision on the ranch that we needed a new stock trailer, I had to convince her, myself, and the bank that it was a good investment to spend $15,000. And if I didn't anticipate that I was going to make $15,001 or $500 or $1,000, it's an expense, not an asset. And that's what that 88 cents on the dollar was. And it's easy to talk about the $500 million that was put in people's pockets, but it didn't create an economy. It didn't create an asset. It didn't give you an opportunity to build on top. We had wanted to suspend payroll taxes on employers and employees. Rather than at 12 cents on the dollar, that money would have gone to Kalispell florists and chiropractors and engineers, and I don't know what. Because I don't think government should be picking and choosing winners and losers. Government should be creating an environment of liberating Main Street so we have the opportunity of building a better economy. You don't do it by pure spending, which their jobs stimulus bill was. And that's why I always use the word failed stimulus. Pretty good adjective because it failed. Where are the jobs?
Gentlemen would like to give you each a 1-minute rebuttal. The order will be the same. Senator Tester, Mr. Koch, and Congressman Rehberg.
If you want to look at the Kalispell bypass, a portion of that was done by that failed stimulus package. The people that went to work on that bypass did that work because of money that came out of the stimulus package. If you want to look at the Going the Sun Road, much of the work that's been done on the Going the Sun Road came out of the stimulus bill. If you want to look at the community health center that's downtown Kalispell, done by the stimulus bill. If you want to look at the revamp of the fire department downtown Kalispell, done by the stimulus bill. And if that's a failed stimulus, putting people to work to build infrastructure that allows small businesses to succeed, and every one of them will allow small businesses to succeed, then I wonder what the definition of success is. And then if you combine that with the fact that these were tax reductions to the tune of $575 million for Montana alone, and it also helped fund firefighters, policemen, and teachers to keep them on the job. It was something that we did at a time when we were losing 800,000 jobs that needed to be done because we couldn't sit back and do nothing.
Well, it's interesting, the debate on this. Rehberg didn't vote for it, but he did vote to raise the debt ceiling. Now, the interesting thing about that is, of course, you can vote against this bill or that bill, but at the end of the day, well, both gentlemen have voted to raise the debt ceiling a ton of times. What you're basically saying is, I'm enabling this spending that I didn't vote for. So, either way, it's two sides of the same coin. One guy's voting for it, the other guy's voting to allow it. Let's raise the debt ceiling, let's put in more debt. What do we go over, $16 trillion? Are we really better off because of this stimulus? I would say no. The only way we're going to get back to being a prosperous country is to go back to the vision of the Founding Fathers. And that's where the federal government stays out of your life and out of your pocket.
The proof is in the results. Where are the jobs? Borrowing $1 trillion against our future, not being able to pay that back now, and then putting it into spending is okay. We spend money in this government. But that's an expense, and that's part of the appropriations process. If you're going to stimulate the economy, then it needs to be timely, it needs to be targeted, and it needs to be temporary. You can do that by giving tax certainty. That's why as you drove in, you saw my bus that says, Liberate Main Street. There are those that want to occupy Wall Street. There are those that want to tighten up the capital markets. I don't. What I want to do is I want to get government off of the backs of small businesses. And you do that through tax certainty, removing the impediments of the regulations that are being put upon them. And you certainly don't do it by borrowing $1 trillion against these kids on a failed stimulus, as we saw.
Second question this evening will be asked by Kellen Brown of the Flathead Beacon. Gentlemen, you'll have 90 seconds for your response, and the order is Mr. Cox, Congressman Rehberg, and Senator Tester.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Cox, federal land is a huge part of Montana's outdoor heritage. Your website says Montana needs to take back full control of its land. Is this really feasible? Do any of you believe that more federal land should be sold for private ownership? Please discuss your ideas for stewardship of those federal lands, including your opinions on Senator Tester's Forest Jobs and Recreation Act and Congressman Rehberg's Resolution 1505, the National Security and Federal Lands Protection Act.
Thank you. Well, the first thing we need to remember is that in the Constitution, it doesn't talk in there where the federal government gets to own or manage all of these huge tracts of land. And in the county that I'm in, Ravalli County, it's something like 72% of the county is owned by the government. That's a huge percentage. Now, I would argue that the first thing we need to do is we need to get the federal government to give the land back to the state. The state of Montana, you people are the ones who know best what we should be doing with the land, not the federal government. We don't need Washington, D.C. dropping off wolves and grizzly bears and whatever else they feel. They're dropping those off on federal lands. As far as the Wilderness Act, honestly, I haven't read it, but it does increase the wilderness, which would increase the area that's going to be controlled by the federal government. So that would go in opposite of what my vision would be for Montanans, which would be Montanans having control of their land, not a bunch of bureaucrats in Washington. As far as the 1505, well, that is, as far as I'm concerned, a police state bill. It seems to give more power to Homeland Security. You're talking 100 miles from Canada down all the way across the state. You know, I don't know about you, but I really doubt Al-Qaeda's trying to come in over the peaks of Glacier. And there's, you know, it's just a ridiculous bill, and it should have never been voted for or passed.
Not one single acre is added to the federal government by 1505. Make no mistake. There's legislation or there's an amendment that I put in place that said it will not affect recreation, hunting, or fishing. Ironically, it's the exact same bill that Senator Tester voted for in the Senate without those protections. But let's talk about Forest Jobs and Recreation Bill for a minute. Isn't it ironic as well that he doesn't put the word wilderness in the bill? And that's the only thing that's guaranteed in that legislation, is 600,000 acres of more wilderness. There is no guarantee of the jobs, none at all. But there is a guarantee of 600,000 more acres of wilderness. And that's one of the reasons, again, I'm running. It's two different visions. I don't believe the people of Montana want to lock up more property at this time before they try to address the management of our forests. One of the reasons you see the fires is because we don't actively manage our dead and dying trees. And what we need to do is we need to come up with policies that clearly understand that we can environmentally sensitively manage our forests for the betterment of the community. We can create the jobs, and at the same time, we can clean out those dead and dying trees. We can have a safer wildlife, safer environment, and we can protect our wildlife and our watersheds. So we need a management, but what we need is balanced management. And I wish that he wasn't trying to fool the public into believing this is a Forest Jobs and Recreation Bill, because really all it does is guarantee more wilderness. That's what it is. Be honest with the people of Montana and label it correctly, the Wilderness Forest Jobs and Recreation Bill.
What the Forest Jobs and Recreation Bill, as long as we're visible about it, does is it allows foresters to do their job, to manage their forests and not spend all their money on fighting fires. And how did it happen? It mandates to put loggers to work with chainsaws and truckers to work hauling those logs and give those mills a dependable supply. Now, the congressman will talk about the fact that we aren't managing our forests, and he's right. We haven't managed them right for 30 years, and that's why the folks got together in the same room and put aside their differences and worked from common ground and worked it out. Because they knew what had been going on for the last 30 years in our forest has not been working. And he might claim that there's all wilderness and no jobs in here, but he also claimed that when I delisted wolves, that that'd never work either. That it'd go to court and they'd be back on the endangered species list. Well, guess what? We delisted wolves, and we've got a hunting season that's starting soon, very soon, this week, I believe. And that delisting happened without the support of the congressman. As far as the sportsman bill, as far as that 1505 goes, what it does is gives the Department of Homeland Security carte blanche authority over every other federal agency within 100 that have actions within 100 miles of that border. If you give an agency that kind of authority, I guarantee you they will abuse it. That's a given. We've seen it before with Real ID. We've seen it with Patriot Act, 2 bills that the congressman has supported. This is in that same vein. 1505 takes power away from our agencies and the people and gives it to one person in the Department of Homeland Security.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move to the rebuttal round. You have 1 minute each. The order is the same. Mr. Cox, Congressman Rehberg, and Senator Tester.
Well, this is still just always comes back to what should the federal government be doing versus the state. Now, we just heard a great dialogue here about how it hasn't worked for 30 years to have the federal government managing our forests. And now we want to turn around and give them more ability to manage it, give them bigger wilderness areas. Why are we always hiring the people that created the problem to fix it? The federal government is the problem. We need local control. It should always be local control. I mean, this is a little off subject, but now the United Nations is wanting to tax everybody in the world and control all land in the world. We need to get everything back down to where it's going to be at your local county or city or state. We need to get all this stuff out of the hands of the federal government.
You know, this is what people don't like about the government. Politicians say one thing and do another. Senator Tester voted for exactly the same concept of 1505 in the Senate without the protections of hunting, fishing, and recreation. All we're doing is giving the federal agencies the same opportunity on federal properties that they currently have on state and local and deeded properties. That's all it does. Management of our forests, nothing changes in this forest and recreation bill except wilderness is created. Please understand when I tell you that is the only guarantee. He has not changed the appeals process one bit. Not at all. So all you're going to get is more wilderness. You're not going to get the jobs that are anticipated or promised unless the environmental organizations promise not to sue. Well, what kind of a court would accept that? If they're not following the law, then they should have the opportunity to sue. You're not changing the appeals process, so you're being fooled into believing something that is not true. That's a whopper, and I hope you don't fall for it, because the only thing guaranteed in that bill is 600,000 acres of more wilderness.
It was the same argument that was used on delisting wolves by the congressman. Said it'll never work. They'll go to court, they'll challenge it, and you're going to lose. Wolves will be back on the list. Guess what? It didn't happen. And it's the same thing on this bill. And the proof is in the people who oppose it. The extremes on the far left and the far right. 70% of the people in this state understand how important this bill is, and they understand, especially after seeing the red and dead trees and the fires this year, which we could have been harvesting some of those trees if we could have got this bill passed a few years back. Could have been prevented, and we could have put people to work right up here in the Flathead with good paying jobs, and manage our forests in a way that makes sense for our kids and our grandkids. But oh no, that can't happen, because the extremes on this bill are the ones that are stopping it from passing, and the congressman is part of that extreme agenda.
Thank you, gentlemen. The third question will be from Frank Mealy. We would like your responses on this question to be held to 1 minute each. The order is Congressman Rehberg, Senator Tester, and Mr. Cox. Do you have a question about the response to that, Congressman?
No.
Okay, good. We're good. All right. So 1 minute each on the response. So, Mr. Mealy?
Senator Tester and Representative Rehberg, one of you apparently favors the estate tax or the death tax, take your pick. But the problem is, from listening to your ads, I can't tell which one of you it is. You both stand accused of supporting the estate tax in each other's ads. To all three candidates, please tell us plainly, are you for or against the estate tax and its impact on small farms and small businesses?
Make no mistake, I'm the candidate that wants zero death tax. Jan and I, as a result of a family estate in 1974 and 1976, My family had to sell a third of our ranch, our homes, the corrals, and the barns just to pay the estate tax. It took Jan and I our entire working career in ranching trying to rebuild. We had to build corrals and new water lines, and we didn't even have a house on the place. No family ought to have to go through that. And that's why I have done everything I can to eliminate the death tax. It is not a tax that should be visiting a family when a loved one passes. If you try to enrich yourself with inheritance, you're going to pay an income tax. You're going to pay a capital gains tax. Why does the government feel compelled to have a death tax? So when I vote against something, I'm voting against a 25% rate, a 35%, 55% rate, because I believe the death tax, based upon our own experiences and not wanting it to happen to any other family, any other small business in Montana, the death tax ought to be zeroed out. Plain and simple, that's my position, no death tax.
Me next? Sorry.
No, you
Okay. I want to be clear. All farms and ranches and small businesses domiciled here, I'd like to see exempt from the inheritance tax. And that's why I support a $5 million exemption per person, $10 million per couple. That will exempt many, if not all, of the small businesses and farms in this state. And that's without doing any planning whatsoever. Look, Charlotte and I inherited the farm from our folks. My dad passed away in 2004, my mom passed away in 2009, with far less exemption than that. And they worked hard, and they started planning. We paid not one penny in inheritance tax because they planned for the future. $5 million and $10 million is a reasonable figure that exempts 99.9% of the small businesses and farms and ranches in this state and doesn't offload the additional tax burden onto the middle class.
Well, you just asked a libertarian a tax question. There's not going to be anybody who's going to be better on taxes than me. I mean, how isn't the government in our pockets? You're alive, they tax you. You go to the gas station, they tax you. You die, they tax you. I mean, what's enough? And I get these arguments, it's, poor versus rich or whatever, but the deal with America is we're the only form of government that allows for 3 classes of people. And you have the opportunity to be in the upper class, the middle class, and in communism you only have the elite class and everybody else, the slaves. So I think we need to get rid of the estate tax. We need to keep that money in the pockets of the people, and I would just vote no estate tax whatsoever.
Gentlemen, you have 30 seconds for your rebuttal. I apologize for the confusion on the order. It is Congressman Rehberg, Senator Tester, and Mr. Cox. Thank you.
Frank, I think you heard the answer to your question. Which of the candidates supports elimination of the death tax? There's only one man sitting up here between the two of us, Senator Tester and myself, that believes in the elimination, the zeroing out of the death tax. Our tax policy is in deep trouble in this country. This continuation of temporary tax relief that expires on dates like December 31 is given the uncertainty to people and small business of what their tax bite is going to be next year. That's why you hear the fear and the concern of the fiscal cliff. Give us some certainty. That's why I want to see these taxes, the rest of the taxes, lowered permanently.
Started out this conversation in my opening statement talking about the fact that we need to work together to provide that certainty. The Congressman and I do agree on that, and Dan probably agrees with us too. We need certainty in this country. And it is correct that the exemption for the inheritance tax has flown up and down, and that's a travesty, because you can't plan for it if it flies up and down. If it's made permanent and indexed, which is what I support, I'm talking about the exemption made permanent and indexed, it can provide that kind of certainty we need to move forward and still address the issues we have around our deficit and debt.
Well, I guess my only rebuttal to what I've heard in the rebuttals is that Congressman Rehberg is only one of 2 on the stage. I'm right here. There are 3 of us in the race. My name's Dan Cox, Libertarian, running for U.S. Senate.
I recognize you, but the question was asked of the 2 of us.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. We're going to do something a little bit different on this next one. This is a candidate's choice, and Mr. Cox, you were drawn first, so you have the opportunity to ask a question of either of the other two candidates, and you have 30 seconds for the question and 1 minute for the response.
Well, the Constitution of the United States is the law of the land. We take our oath to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help us God. It's your only requirement for running and accepting office. So, Congressman Rehberg, my question to you is, for someone who doesn't uphold their oath of office, what should the penalty be? Should it be a felony? Should they be thrown out of office? What should it be?
Well, I do uphold the oath of office. One of the more proud moments I had was standing with my left hand on the Bible and right hand in the air and swearing an allegiance to the Constitution. And that is what guides me every day, is how can I best serve the people of Montana while understanding the constitutional requirements, especially states' rights, of giving states the opportunity to control their own destiny, of recognizing that you can't vote for two anti-gun Supreme Court justices like Sotomayor and Justice Kagan, who are going to vote against the individual right to keep and bear arms. I couldn't do that. I would have voted against both of those nominations, the confirmation, because I think that that does, in fact, and would have violated my constitutional principle of standing up for Second Amendment rights. I take that responsibility very seriously, and I stand before you a proud supporter of the Montana and the U.S. Constitution.
Thank you. The fourth question will be asked by Kellen Brown. Gentlemen, you have 90 seconds for your answer, and the order is Senator Tester, Mr. Cox, and Congressman Rehberg.
Yes, Senator Tester, you sponsored legislation to delay capping swipe fees banks could charge retailers when a customer uses a debit card as part of the Dodd-Frank financial reform law. Why did you side with banks in opposing capping swipe fees at the time? And to all the candidates, do you think Dodd-Frank is an effective tool to regulate the financial industry?
Well, thanks for the question, Kellen. It dealt with swipe fees on debit cards. I am not in favor of the federal government setting prices. That's what they did. That's what was proposed with this. And if they do set prices, you have to take into account everything that goes into that fee. The government did not take into account fraud. And with debit cards, and that's what this applied to, if you lose your debit card and somebody picks it up and charges a bunch of stuff on it, the bank picks up the tab on that. It's additional cost, and it's big cost. And so all I ask them to do is, if you're going to fix prices, which is a silly thing to do, then take into account all the costs. We were not successful in getting that done. I think we only got 56 votes, and in the Senate traditionally you have to have 60 to get anything done. But the bottom line is that I'm not in favor of the federal government setting prices, and when they do, they have to take into account all the fees and all the costs before they do that. And fraud is a big, big part of that.
Okay, on the swipe fees, first of all, the government should never be involved in price fixing of any kind in any private business. Senator Tester just made a statement that the banks pick up the tab on the fraud. Well, I can tell you, as a small business owner who's done a lot of merchant transactions, the banks are not. When there is fraud claim, the merchant service sends the merchant, which would be myself, a form, and if I can't prove that it's a legitimate transaction, it comes out of my paycheck. It does not come from the banks. The banks, the way the contracts are set up, all of it's put on the small businessman. So, still, swipe fees, government shouldn't be involved.
Senator Tester's legislation was to fix a problem he created. Dodd-Frank has seized up our markets. It was to go after the 5 banks too big to fail. Go down and talk to your local banker here in Kalispell, Montana, and ask them, was it a mistake? Do you even know what kind of regulations are coming down upon you right now? There's no way that they know, and the irony of it is, when he talks about the fact that he's never voted for a bank bailout, yes he did. He voted to bail out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. He left them out of the reform package And they're part of the problem. A government entity has helped create the housing bubble that existed. So you've got Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac being left out of it, having created the problem, and Dodd-Frank seizing up your local capital markets. While at the same time, he's introducing legislation to try and undo something that was done in Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank was a mistake. We're going to do everything we possibly can to see that the large banks, first of all, too big to fail, really? I'm a rancher. Jan and I, we made bad decisions sometimes. I always said I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice in ranching. Unfortunately, there's a lot of first mistakes to make. And I did. But I never looked to the government to bail me out. And why do we feel like there's entities out there where we have to take taxpayer dollars to bail out people that make bad decisions? That kind of concept, I don't understand. And so we've got a lot of work to do with Dodd-Frank. We're going to have to try and fix it.
I didn't support the bailout of Wall Street, and I never would. Bottom line is that Dodd-Frank has set up to put more cops on the beat to make sure that the bad actors on Wall Street didn't do it again. Hank Paulson said on the cusp of the meltdown, when he came in and said, we're about to melt down economically, there are no regulators on Wall Street. Dodd-Frank puts those regulators back on Wall Street. You want to talk about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the backstop for a 30-year note in our housing industry. Interestingly enough, before it failed, the congressman voted for it. Probably sponsored a bill that allowed for no interest, no down loans that would be backstopped by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And then he's got the gall to come out here tonight and say, gosh, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac failed, and the dream of a 30-year note goes out the window, when he was a big problem with that to begin with. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, for those folks that are in the financial industry, understand that it's critically important if we're going to have a housing industry at all. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is not Wall Street. It's more similar to a government-sponsored entity like a post office.
Well, we hear over and over that Rehberg's a problem and Tester's a problem. I'm going to agree with both of them. We've got to get control of this banking system, period. I mean, you got to realize that the people who are in power, they love these housing bubbles, because if you listen to what Thomas Jefferson said, he said, if you ever allow private banks to control the issuance of your currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, they'll deprive you of all property and leave you homeless on the continent your fathers conquered. So they love dumping money into the housing, getting your contracts up really high, then they cut the currency out of the system, which causes the deflation, which means your dollar can't pay for the contract anymore, and then they take your property. So expect more housing crisis. We've already heard it a couple times tonight.
Again, don't believe me. Talk to your local banker. Go down and ask them what Dodd-Frank is doing for them or to them. More regulations out of Washington, D.C. in an attempt to get at Wall Street, and unfortunately, it has an effect on Main Street. And if you listen, if you go out and you have town hall meetings, open meetings, where you just hand a mic to people and say, what's the biggest problem that's facing America today? In many cases, they'll say, we go down to the bank, we can't borrow money. I can't get a loan to buy a home. Because the federal government now has auditors that come in and say, you're giving too many questionable loans, and so we're going to ratchet it down. We're going to oversee you. In an attempt to get at the banks too large to fail, there has been the unintended consequence of ratcheting down the opportunity for individuals here in the Flathead and small businesses throughout Montana to go out and borrow money to expand, build a better economy, a real economy, not a fake economy that was tried to be created by a failed stimulus.
The next question will be asked by Frank Mealy. Gentlemen, you have 1 minute for your response, and the order of the response would be Mr. Cox, Congressman Rehberg, and Senator Tester.
Montana is known as the treasure state, and part of that treasure is coal and oil. How specifically do you intend to represent the state's interests in getting those resources out of the ground? And in this regard, do you consider the EPA an enemy of Montana's interests or a helpful partner?
Well, the first thing you got to realize is that I'm a true believer that Montana should go after its natural resources in order to propel its economy. Of course, as a libertarian, there's only a couple of rules to that. You can't damage anybody's life, liberty, or property in going after those things. Now, the EPA, is it a good thing or a bad thing? I think generally they've overregulated and overstepped their bounds. If I'm correct on this, I'm pretty sure that it was a Republican who put the EPA in effect, Richard Nixon. So what we need to do is we need to get government out of the way unless one of these coal producers or somebody else is going to damage somebody's life, liberty, or property.
But Senator Tester support the EPA is shutting a business down in Billings, Montana. When the companies came to him, when the Montana Chamber came to him, when the Farm Bureau came to him and said, please don't vote to continue those regulations because it might shutter a plant in Billings, Montana and around the nation. He voted with the EPA. He voted with the Obama administration. What is going to happen? 35 lost jobs, $10 million out of the Billings and Yellowstone County economy. You know, that's enough to power 100,000 households. That means like shutting down all of Flathead County. Think of the power that that could create at an affordable rate for a group like CFAC right here. Wouldn't that be great to be able to open that and have the high-paying jobs that come along with that? And so you're either going to side with the EPA and shut down coal-fired plants against the best wishes and the best knowledge that coal is a great part of our economy in Montana, and oil and gas. We have the highest concentration of undeveloped coal in the country. You don't do things like vote with the EPA to shut down a plant in Billings.
Coal, oil, natural gas, all of our renewable energy resources are critically important to this state. For the Congressman to say that the Corrette plant will be closed 3 years from now because of regulation of the EPA today, when that regulation's been on the book for 20 years, and PP&L made $1.5 billion last year. They would have to spend a small percentage of that to keep Corrette open, but no, PP&L's more interested in outsourcing your jobs, similar policy to what the Congressman has advocated in his tenure in Congress. Outsource those jobs to other countries, we'll make that investment there, and the hell with Montana. This is all a product of deregulation, which PPL supported and which the Congressman supported back in the 90s. And quite frankly, the EPA makes its rules, and some of them are bad, and some of them aren't so bad. The ones that are bad, we need to get off the books, and the ones that are workable, we need to work with.
Gentlemen, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. The order is the same. Mr. Cox, Congressman Rehberg, and Senator Tester.
Well, once again, this is another argument about federal government, EPA. Who knows best how to manage these resources, the federal government or Montana? I mean, if you take a look at the Montana state constitution, it says in there that everybody has a right to a clean and healthful environment. Maybe we should turn this a little bit more over to the state and get the federal government out of it. They've never been able to manage it properly, and you shouldn't expect them to now.
The senator had an opportunity to vote no. He was asked to vote no. The company said directly, you vote yes, we're probably going to have to shut this plant down. Cap and trade, you voted for cap and trade. What is that? That's nothing more than energy taxes because it make you pay more for your energy. It's going to cost jobs. It's part of Montana's economy. Cap and trade is a bad idea. So was shutting down the Corrette plant. Because, you know, on average, that could end up costing you 25% more in your utility costs alone, just here in Montana.
PP&L was in my office, Congressman. And in April of last year, they said they could deal with the utility MAC rule. They said what they asked me to work on was the problems they had with coal ash and haze, and we've been doing that, and we will continue to do that. So the bottom line is I did listen to the executives of PP&L, and they said they could work with this regulation that's been on the books for 20 years. And then a few months ago, or a few weeks ago actually, they decided to announce a proposed plant closing 3 years from now. I said before, we're drilling more, we're importing less, we're utilizing our resources more. I think that's a good thing.
Thank you. Our next question this evening is from Kellen Brown. Gentlemen, you have 90 seconds for your answer, and the order will be Congressman Rehberg, Senator Tester, and Mr. Cox.
Yes. Congressman Rehberg, as chair of the House Appropriations Subcommittee, you proposed a budget that slashed or eliminated budgets for public broadcasting, family planning clinics, and national service programs such as at one time AmeriCorps. Do you stand by that budget? And to all the candidates, what specific programs would you consider reducing or eliminating to reduce the country's deficit?
Keep in mind that we have a debt problem in this country. When Senator Tester first went to office, the debt was $8 trillion. It's now over $16 trillion. We're bringing in $3 trillion a year in income and spending 4.5. We have to get real. We have to get serious. We have to try and balance our budget like families are all over Montana. They're having to tighten their belt. Do I wish we didn't have to make reductions? Of course, who does want to? But you have to learn to live within your means, and what you do is you set priorities. And your priorities have to be based upon the values of the people of Montana and the people that you represent. So as I looked at my budget, it's an $800 billion budget. I had to make decisions and determinations. What's in the best interest? So I identified areas like Head Start, special education, impact aid. I decided I wanted to make those the priorities because those are the things that I think touch the most Montanans. I have the Human Committee, Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education. So I have to look the people in the eye and say, how can I best serve you as your congressman, as the chairman of an appropriations budget, that's having to make tough decisions? And so I have to set priorities, and I stand by those priorities. I wanted people to know what I thought was in the best interest of trying to help those that are most in need with the money that we have available, while at the same time trying to turn the economy around, not by raising taxes, but trying to control our spending so we can let our economy catch up to our debt.
Well, let's get real. Let's talk about where we were in the year 2000 when the congressman got elected. He was handed a surplus. He had a surplus. We weren't running deficits then. Frittered that away. Had an opportunity to put not one but two wars on the credit card, so we did that. Prescription drug program on the credit card. That's the debt. A major, major, major tax cut paid for, on that credit card. So if you want to talk about a long history of not being fiscally responsible, not being responsible, period, the congressman needs to look in the mirror. As far as the programs that you cut in your subcommittee, the Title X clinics that thousands, tens of thousands of women depend on for their health care and prevention in health care speaks for itself. They can't get it anywhere else. The AmeriCorps programs that puts our kids and our seniors and everybody in between to work does exactly that. It teaches them how to work with their hands. It keeps our seniors occupied. But those weren't good programs, because what we're going to do is, instead of keeping those programs, we're going to keep the tax breaks for the wealthiest of the wealthy. And that's how he's been budgeting.
This is the most incredible discussion I think I've ever heard. We're talking about nibbling on the edges. I mean, PBS, some of these things. Do you know what we spend the most money on? We spend it on the military, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and a few of the welfare umbrella programs. That makes up almost 75% of all the spending we have. And we're talking about cutting PBS and a couple of these little things. Give me a break. When Ronald Reagan got into office, there was a $900 billion deficit. By the time he left office, he'd increased it $1.7 trillion. Do you know how much money that is in 80s money? Well, since Reagan was in office, granted, we started at $900 billion. We're now at $16 trillion. These guys aren't talking about reducing anything. They're only talking about nibbling at some of the proposed increases in government spending. If you want to get real about getting back to a government that sits inside your Constitution that'll fit in there, which is what we need, you need to vote Libertarian. Because I can tell you this right now, about $1.1 trillion is going to be collected this year in income tax, and we're going to be another $1.7 trillion in debt. So if these guys had their way, we'd have to increase your income tax by about 140% just to balance the budget. And we're talking about cutting PBS. Let's get real, people.
Gentlemen, you have 1 minute for a rebuttal. The order's the same. Congressman Rehberg, Senator Tester, and Mr. Cox.
There are those in Congress that can never spend enough. They always talk about spending what we did last year plus inflation. Again, we're bringing in $3 trillion, and we're spending 4.5. We're not close. This isn't cutting out a cup of coffee. We're not going to a movie. We've got serious fiscal problems in this country. And the Republican leadership came to me and said, would you chair the toughest budget of all, now that we've got the majority? Would you take on the human interest budget? Would you try and right-size, downsize, find efficiency? You know, in Pell alone, I sat down with junior colleges and for-profits and public colleges, and we made a determination that if we worked together, we could find savings just in that program alone. In 2007, the cost was $20 billion. This year, if we hadn't made changes, it would have been $43.5 billion. We were able to save $22 billion over the next 10 years, just in that one program alone, sitting down with the various entities like the junior colleges and saying, what can we do? How can we right-size, economize, and make sure that Pell is there for the next generation of students as it was for this generation?
Talk about Pell because it's important. We happen to be here at Flathead Valley Community College where we're creating our next generation of entrepreneurs and well-trained workforce. Pell is very, very important for our kids. Very important for their opportunity to go to institutions of higher learning because it costs a lot. Those grants don't have to be paid back. Congressman called Pell Grants the 21st century welfare. Look, this is our economy of the future. These are the folks who are going to be running this show in short order and will be doing a better job than us. And so we need to get them a good education. The debt and the deficit is a huge issue. It is the major issue that we have to work on, both during the lame duck, and hopefully we'll get a pattern down in the first quarter of 2013. It's going to require people working together, Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, folks from the House, the Senate, the executive branch, putting aside our politics and really working to put this country on sound financial footing. It is the biggest issue facing us. And it is also the biggest issue that can be played politics with. And it's also the issue that neither Democrats, nor Republicans, or independents, or libertarians alone are going to fix. It's going to take everybody working together just like we built Montana.
Well, the only thing that can fix any of this is going back to the Constitution. Now, I'm going to talk really fast because I only have 30 seconds. Everybody wants to talk about the debt. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that we just did a partial audit of the Federal Reserve Bank and found out that they printed $16.1 trillion and gave it away at nearly free interest rates to bankers and different tyrants in different countries all over the world. Now, we've got a $16 trillion debt. We just found out that they printed $16 trillion and gave it away, which is destroying the value of your dollar. That is a hidden tax that you can't see. That's how they're destroying the economy, is through the printing of money. Now they just came out and said that we're going to do QE3, quantitative easing number 3. And they said it would be open-ended. And what they said is it'll print up to $40 billion per month. So there's a lot more that we need to argue about than just some of this deficit spending. We need to get back to constitutional money and quit printing our way into bankruptcy.
We're going to move into another candidate question round. And Congressman Rehberg, it's your choice to ask the question. And you have 30 seconds for that question. And whoever you ask the question will have 1 minute for the response.
Senator Tester, you voted with Barack Obama 95% of the time. You voted for a failed stimulus, a health care reform that did not reform health care. You voted against the coal industry for the EPA regulations that are going to shutter the current plant, and you voted for cap and trade. Would you vote, or do you believe, or do you think that Barack Obama, as your nominee for president, deserves re-election?
Well, first of all, I'm going to have a news break here. Your 95% figure is crazy. Sorry, hon, but I've been married to you for 35 years. I don't agree with you 95% of the time. I mean, I've got to tell you, it's inaccurate and it is misleading, and you know it, and it's the same thing with the list that you came down. Now, the fact is that I never voted for cap and trade. I, along with almost 3/4 of the Senate, voted to take up an energy policy for this country that we still don't have. It's critically important that we get an energy policy for this country because he who has affordable energy as we move into the 21st century is going to have an incredible opportunity to help spread democracy throughout the world and continue to be a leader in the world. You went down a laundry list of stuff. I don't watch much TV. When I see them on there all the time, and they're bogus. Every one of them. You know, it is amazing to me. It's amazing to me. I said early on, they define me as something I'm not. If they define me as something, not that farmer from Big Sandy who comes back home every weekend and covers the state and listens to Montanans, then they got a chance to beat me. They keep picking stuff out of the bag and throwing it against the wall, hoping something will stick.
The next question will be from Frank Mealy. Gentlemen, you have 1 minute for your response, and the order is Senator Tester, Mr. Cox, and Congressman Rehberg.
Gentlemen, the Supreme Court has ruled that corporations and other groups have a right to a political voice. That has resulted in a cacophony of screaming distortions and distractions in TV and radio advertising across this country and even in Montana. How do you propose to balance the First Amendment with common decency so that future political campaigns do not have to be waged at the same low level as this one?
Well, thanks, Frank. Thanks for the question. And what we've seen this election cycle is the first election cycle where the Citizens United decision that the Supreme Court made 2.5 years ago is in full swing. We've seen tens of millions of dollars of secret money come into this state to try to define me as something I'm not. And quite frankly, the issue becomes about transparency. We could talk about the decision and say we could have a constitutional amendment to try to fix it. That's just about impossible to do, although it is an opportunity to try to fix it. What really needs to be done, and what can be done, I should say, is transparency. The folks who are donating all this money need to tell us who they are. We need to find out if they might not even be domiciled in this country, which is totally illegal. Let's find out who they are. Let's make them do the same thing that anybody in this room would do if they donated to any of our campaigns. Let's make them put their name down and own up to it. Transparency is a good thing. It's something that I've tried to do my time in Washington because Montana is a very transparent government. Once again, Washington, D.C. could learn a lot from Montana. Transparency is one of those things.
Well, I fully agree with transparency on giving money to different candidates. And speaking as somebody who's received millions from corporations, I may have a little bit different opinion than these two gentlemen. I actually have been a corporation owner. A lot of people may not know what that means, but sometimes there's only one or two people that own it. So, for example, let's say the government comes and tries to regulate my corporation. That could be a serious problem. They might be able to take tens of millions of dollars away from me and then turn around and tell me that I can only give $2,500 to Gary Johnson or Ron Paul in order to defend my rights as a corporation owner. A corporation is a contract of individuals who all have individual rights. They have the ability to protect their property, and they should be able to fund protecting their property. It's just that simple.
Thank you, Frank. I'm glad we always get to talk about the Constitution and the fundamental freedom of free speech, because what is more important, frankly, than political free speech? The Citizens United decision was one that was based upon the Constitution. That's what the Supreme Court ruled. And from day one, every time I've had an opportunity in the United States Congress to vote on any kind of campaign reform, I've always said, what I stand for is 100% transparency from $1, not 199. We're not going to exempt the NRA or labor unions or corporations. Everybody must be disclosed from $1. And you know what? Kind of neat. We now have the internet. And you can disclose it within a 24-hour period during the election. Then you ultimately, the voter, could make a determination. If you didn't like who we received our contributions from, then vote against us. If it's okay, vote for us or vote for somebody else to think about it. 100% transparency within 24 hours on the internet.
You have 30 seconds each for a rebuttal. Senator Tester.
Yeah, thank you. The problem is the Citizens United does not require any sort of transparency, so we don't know who these corporations are. We don't even know if they're from this country. Look, if you think a corporation is a person, if you really think a corporation is a person, then the Citizens United decision would be okay with you. And they would probably endorse you, Citizens United, like they did my opponent, Congressman Rehberg. But the fact is a corporation is not a person. It's different than me. My wife and I have a corporation too, and it's different than us. People are people. Corporations are entities.
Well, I think we just got to go back down the list of the constitutionality of all this. If corporations aren't people, then let's take away their right to a fair trial. Hey, let's just take their property. We don't need a judge or a jury. They're not people. Let's just go raid the till. The Constitution is for justice. And if you own a corporation, you have the right to protect that property that the corporation makes legally.
I think Montanans want everybody to be treated the same. We don't necessarily need to define what a corporation is or what a union is or what an organization is, as everybody feels like everybody is going to be included in any of the control or regulation. And my plan does that. Again, no special treatment for anyone. 100% transparency from $1. Then you don't have to get into defining what is what and who is who. I think that's what Montana voters want, and I think that's what the Constitution can support.
Next question will be asked by Frank Mealy. Gentlemen, you have 90 seconds for your response, and the order is Mr. Cox, Congressman Rehberg, and Senator Tester.
Congressional action and inaction has resulted in January 1st, 2013 being labeled Tax-mageddon, as the largest tax increases in history are about to take effect. In addition, because of the failed debt reduction negotiations, Congress has put in place sequestration rules that will force $1.2 trillion in automatic budget cuts on January 2nd, the following day. What is the effect on the economy and the country going to be from this 1-2 punch, and what will you do to protect Americans from it?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to talk about is what are we going to do if we don't cut? Think about that for just a second. If America truly becomes bankrupt, what does that mean for each and every individual in America? I can't think of a country in the entire world that's gone bankrupt and out of the ashes has risen this free, prosperous people that have rights. You know what comes in its place? Tyranny, communism, fascism. What we need to do is we need to take a really hard look at where we're at. We're going to be another 1.5, 1.7 trillion upside down again this year. Do I think we need cuts? Absolutely. Is it possible that it's going to hurt? I think so, because there's a lot of taking from one individual and giving to another. And what we need in America is what we are founded on, which is where every Montanan grabs their bootstraps and they get up in the morning and they go out and they fend for themselves. The beauty of that is when you're independent of government, you're free. When you're dependent on government, you're a slave. And what we need to do as a country is work to get as many people independent of government as possible. So I think the cuts would be great, and I think they should quit raising the debt ceiling.
First course of action in the new United States Congress, beginning next year when I'm in the Senate, will be to repeal Obamacare. That solves $1.7 trillion of the problem over the course of the next 10 years right there. Secondly, I would immediately make permanent the tax relief of 2001 and 2003. As I talk to small businesses and individuals, they want to know what their taxes are going to be. As it is right now with the death tax, it goes back to $1 million and a 55% rate. If we eliminate the death tax, if we make the other tax relief permanent, you know, when we repeal Obamacare, we get $517 billion back into Medicare that was taken out to help set up a new entitlement. That was not the right thing to do. I want you to keep in mind that I voted against the super committee because I never thought it was going to work in the first place. Hired 12 people to go behind closed doors to make decisions about the country. I thought Congress was a super committee. There's 435 of us. That's pretty super. We should be making those decisions. We can make those decisions. And so what I have promised is the first piece of action would be to repeal Obamacare so we can get back to doing what we really need to do and reform health care. And we can come to grips with our fiscal problems. And that saves $1.4 $7 trillion, and by then making the tax relief permanent, it will give certainty to small business to begin building that economy that we know is just ready to bust loose, that people know what the rules are going to be and what their taxes are going to be, what their cost of doing business is going to be. They're ready. Let's get government out of the way.
Well, I would just say that you got a pre-existing condition. Too bad, because you're not going to be able to get insurance because there won't be that piece of legislation to hold insurance companies accountable. If you get sick, get booted off your insurance policy, too bad, because there's not going to be anything there to be able to hold those insurance companies accountable. The list goes on and on. If you've got a kid 26 years of age, if you're concerned about prescription drug costs, the list goes on. But the question was about the deficit and debt. And I talked about it a little bit earlier in this debate. The sequestration, the fiscal cliff that we're going to be up against as of January 1 of 2013 is real, and it's important that we work together to fix it. The Budget Control Act, that if we wouldn't have passed would put the country into default, required the super committee to meet and come up with a proposal. They never came up with it. So now what does it require? It requires that big super committee called the House and the Senate, made up of Democrats and Republicans and independents and libertarians, to all work together and come up with a proposal, a major proposal that reduces our debt and our deficit in a big, big way. There's a lot of templates out there. There's a lot of folks that have done work, including the super committee, that we can go back to and work and get it done. But the bottom line is, if we don't work together, we're not going to get the job done. And that's job one in the lame duck and in the new Congress. And I look forward to working on this problem because it's a problem we can solve, but it requires us working together like Montanans.
1 minute each for the rebuttal. Mr. Cox.
Well, it is interesting that this question turned into a debate about Obamacare. I think that's fantastic. I'm going to address that a little bit. Congressman Rehberg just said that we're going to save all kinds of money if we repeal Obamacare. The only problem is the slogan of the Republicans right now is repeal and replace Obamacare. Now, if you're one of those individuals in this room who does not want Obamacare, why would you want to replace it with Republican care? You know, I saw an article just the other day where Mitt Romney came out and said he's going to keep huge portions of Obamacare, or that he would. Who is the father of Romney care? I mean, come on. This is just the left and right paradigm once again. You know, one person says they want it, the other one says they're going to repeal it. At the end of the day, you're going to get something in between that was either, you know, proposed by Republicans or some bipartisan committee. Once again, they're just nibbling on the edges. This is not going to happen if you vote for these men.
First course of action is to repeal Obamacare and put that $517 billion back into Medicare, where it should not have been taken from the first place. But do you realize within the President's health care reform, there's 2 new entitlements that don't exist today? They don't go into place until 2014. What are they? The expansion of Medicaid, nobody's on it, and the insurance premium subsidy, nobody's on it. Do you know what the price tag for that is? $1.4 trillion. And we haven't even been hit with that bill yet. So they're not necessarily telling you the truth. You know, there are things, the goodies that they gave up front. There are ideas and ways that we can address the uninsured and the high risk. We can do that. We've done that. We had a high-risk pool. We had the very same thing in Helena already, and the President's health care reform destroyed that and started all over again. So let's repeal Obamacare. Let's save that money, and let's put our tax relief permanently in place so we can rebuild our economy, revitalize the small businesses that are ready to build right here in the Flathead Valley.
Well, to listen to the Congressman talk, you would think that the old system was just grand. The old system was not just grand. Many, many folks, small businesses, farms that have been in their family for generations, if they were unlucky enough to be in the wrong gene pool, they'd end up losing not what they've earned in a lifetime, but also what their parents and grandparents and previous generations had earned in a lifetime. Bottom line is that there are steps in the health care bill that are going to help small business and they're going to help working families. And as it gets implemented, you're going to see more competition in the marketplace. We've already seen costs for health care. They're still increasing, but at the lowest level in several decades. But it's got to work. And we've got to continue to monitor it in Congress to make sure it continues to work. Same like we did with the 1099, those issues are going to continue to come up. The last thing I would say is this. The budget has got to be job one when we go back to Washington, D.C. And I'm talking about the deficit and the debt as it applies to the budget. It is critically important that we work together to get that fixed. If we don't, just take a look at Greece, the canary in the mine shaft. We've got to fix it, and it's going to take cuts. And there's templates out there to do it.
Next question will be from Kellen Brown. 90 seconds for your response, please, gentlemen. And the order is Congressman Rehberg, Senator Tester, and Mr. Cox.
Amid one of the worst droughts in a generation, the U.S. House failed to pass a farm bill this year. Congressman Rehberg, you criticized those in your own party for not bringing it to a vote. What programs within the farm bill do each of you think should be cut or consolidated in order to ensure passage? Or do you think the bill needs to be fully funded, and why?
I did criticize my leadership. I wrote letters, I met with them. I even signed what's called a discharge petition, which tries to blast it out of the committee, because I think it's irresponsible not to have again placed some certainty into the hands of our agricultural producers all throughout America, but especially in Montana. We need to do that. And that's one of the areas I think we probably all agree that we need to provide the income security, the safety net. The problem is part of the farm bill is 20% is production agriculture, the other 80% is not. And so that is where the argument is. However, we can move beyond that argument, and I honestly believe we can come together, working together. This is one of the areas where John and I totally agree, that we need a farm bill. We need a 5-year farm bill, and I think the House of Representatives should pass a bill in the period of time between the election and the beginning of the year, so we can begin pounding out the differences between the two bills. And I think we can come to a commonality. We can come to an agreement. But in the meantime, the House of Representatives passed a bill to deal with the immediate emergency, and the livestock producers came to us because of drought and fire, and they said, would you please pass a mitigation effort? While you're arguing about the 5-year farm bill, what about us right now? And we passed it in the House, and it's been held up in the Senate, and they're playing politics with it in an attempt to win their way on their bill. Move beyond the partisan politics in the Senate, show some leadership, and pass that livestock mitigation bill that is sitting in the Senate. We can do that in a lame duck session, and we can address the immediate problem.
We ought to have passed the farm bill before we left on vacation 2 weeks ago. And the congressman should have kept the House in order to get that done. It is one of the most important jobs Congress has to do. Why? Because it deals with food security for this country, and it deals with the safety net for our people in production agriculture, those people that are family farms and ranches. The bill that was passed out of the Senate way back in June saved $23 billion. It saved $23 billion, and it provided that safety net and that food security. The House should have taken it up. The farm state House members should have held them there until they passed it. It was a good bill. It dealt with the drought. It dealt with the fire. It dealt with the disasters that the ranchers and farmers all across this country, that Montana's no exception, had to deal with over the past year. But instead, I want to talk about certainty. Instead of having that 5-year certainty of that Senate bill, what we have is a stopgap measure to take care of the drought and the fire disaster that costs the taxpayers money. It doesn't save the $23 billion, because you don't get that savings in passing the entire farm bill, but in fact costs the taxpayers money.
Well, once again, we're just talking about the different forms of government. I'm going to give you a few definitions so that we can figure out what form of government we're talking about here in the Farm Bill. If you have a communist government, they believe in abolishing all property and having the state own all of it. In a fascist government, they believe that you may have some title to your property, but generally the government's going to decide who the winners and losers are. In a free market, capitalist, laissez-faire society, what would happen is those businesses that had the products and services that the consumers wanted would survive and continue on. Now, obviously, we do all need food. But I guess my question is, why is the government always dipping their hands in these things? How come they're always taking from this business owner to give to this business owner, taking from one individual to give to another individual? The government needs to get out of the business of picking winners and losers. That's not what they're supposed to do. Our government is supposed to do one job, and that is to secure your individual rights that were given to you by your Creator.
Again, there's probably nobody more disappointed than I that I couldn't get the leadership to listen to us farm state representatives, because we honestly believe it's in the best interest to have a stable, certain farm bill in place. But in the meantime, we did pass, in fact, livestock disaster mitigation and emergency bill that could have been acted on. But for partisan reasons, they held it up in the Senate, and they did not allow us the opportunity to help the farmers and ranchers that had drought and fire damage to their livestock. And so I'll do everything I possibly can to continue to work during the period between the election and the beginning of the new year to try and get them to move that farm bill forward so it's in place. Now keep in mind, the farm bill is fully funded through the next harvest. So it's already been paid for up until Montana's next harvest. But I don't get any comfort in that amount of time. We must stay diligent in trying to pass a farm bill for the betterment of our agricultural producers so they have that certainty.
The drought disaster programs are non-existent right now because that farm bill wasn't passed. And if you take a look at it from the Senate perspective, you had a chance to get a 5-year farm bill that saves $23 billion, or you got a chance to have a stopgap bill that costs the taxpayers money. It makes no sense whatsoever, if you want to talk about certainty and you want to talk about fiscal discipline, to not pass the Senate Farm Bill, because it does everything we need to do in this country. And since agriculture is the #1 industry in the state of Montana, it's pretty darn important to have people that go to bat to get things done and not just give them lip service.
Well, one thing that we keep hearing is the government's going to create certainty. That's interesting. The only certainty the government's going to create for you is more debt, more inflation, and a poor economy unless they get out of the way. And it is very interesting that we're still not talking about inflation. $16.1 trillion spent, $40 billion a month more to be printed. We don't have the money to be picking between one business or another. That is not what our government's for.
We'll be moving into another candidate question round, and it's 30 seconds for the question, 1 minute for the response. Senator Tester.
Yeah, thank you. This question is for Congressman Rehberg. Congressman, over the past year, you've tried to eliminate the Title X program 3 times. This program serves 26 clinics across Montana. One of them is here with the Community Health Center right here in Kalispell. It serves tens of thousands of women. You have been criticized for claiming that Title X is a duplicative program when in fact it is not. Many women would flat not be covered for preventative services or be able to get their health care taken care of. If women can't use Medicare or go to Title X, where are they supposed to go for their health care if you have your way?
I do take my job seriously in the Health and Human Services Appropriations Subcommittee. And what we tried to do is we tried to find areas where there was either duplication or the government had expanded beyond what it was intended to grow to. You know, Obamacare is nothing more than a government run or government getting itself between a doctor and the patient or a doctor and the hospital. And we made the determination that family planning services and such were covered for the poor under Medicaid. We have Medicare. We have Social Security. We want to preserve and protect. And you don't take $716 billion out of Medicare and hope to preserve and protect. You don't take money out of various programs that are working just fine, like the high-risk pool up in Helena, and destroy it with a new program. You don't create new entitlements that don't exist when you already are having financial problems that exist already. And so we looked government-wide and we made a determination that Medicaid had expanded to the point where it could take care of those that are most in need. And we don't want to do anything that's going to harm the health care of an individual by getting between a doctor and their hospital or a doctor and their patient.
Okay, we're going to go into the closing statements. You have 2 minutes each, gentlemen, and just to let you know, the order that you will be responding was through a random drawing of the folks, financial folks at the Interlake business office. So first up, Mr. Cox, then Senator Tester, and then Congressman Rehberg.
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's been an honor to fight for liberty. Hopefully you feel I've been straightforward with the questions that have been asked me. I don't know if you noticed earlier, but I did ask Congressman Rehberg what the penalty should be if someone didn't uphold their oath of office, and he totally ignored what that should be. You know, we've tried it all different ways. We've had Republican presidents, we've had Democrat presidents, we've had Republican in control of the Congress, we've had Democrats in control of Congress, we've had it split, and we've had every way in between. All it's gotten us so far is debt, inflation, and war. Now, I totally disagree that these gentlemen have upheld their oath of office. And without singling either of them out, I'd like you to look up and see who voted for the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows the president to detain you without trial and also breaks posse comitatus because he uses the military to do so. Look and see who's voted for the Patriot Act. Look who's voted for the Real ID Act, papers please. Look and see who's voted for the big prescription D plan. Look who's voted for Obamacare. Look who's voted for the stimulus. Look who's voted for the banker bailouts. Look who hasn't gone after the Federal Reserve Bank for printing money outside of their congressional authority, because Congress is the one who's supposed to coin money. I think you just need to look at these things and say, have these gentlemen upheld their oath of office? Well, one thing I can promise you is I will, to the best of my ability. And I hope you'll support me, because supporting me is supporting liberty. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank the Interlake and the Beacon for holding this debate. I want to thank Congressman Rehberg and Dan Cox for being here today. It has been an interesting debate. I want to thank all of you for being here. It's been interesting because there's a clear difference between the Congressman and myself and Dan Cox. The fact is that if you take a look at the record of accomplishment that I have done over the last 6 years, and the Congressman's case, his case over the last 12 years, and talk about fiscal responsibility, the man who started out with a surplus and ended up putting 2 wars in a prescription drug plan on the credit card, along with the a tax policy that inflated our debt. If you look at the person who wants to make sure that people with pre-existing conditions or people who get sick and get thrown out the policy, folks like Lisa Jones, quite frankly, who went to a Title X clinic right here in Kalispell and is here tonight because of that Title X clinic, the clinic that Congressman Rehberg wanted to put out of business. If you want to talk about infrastructure, in 1960, the town of Kalispell talked about putting a bypass around this town to help the downtown community become more successful. We finally got it done, or started on that road in the last 3 years. Look, this campaign and this election is about responsible decision making. You can take a look at the responsible decision making. You can take a look at who's got your priorities in mind versus his own priorities in mind. You can take a look at the guy who protects tax breaks for millionaires, but doesn't protect folks like Lisa Jones. I would ask for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
We do have 2 paths. One is the government solution and the government path, and the other is mine. Senator Tester talks about effectiveness. Yes, he was very effective in supporting the president as the 60th vote for Obamacare. We would not have it if it hadn't been for his 60th vote. He was very effective in voting for a failed stimulus, very effective in voting against the coal companies in Billings, Montana, shutting the Correct plant down, costing us $10 million out of our economy. He was very effective in supporting 2 justices for the Supreme Court that are anti-Second Amendment rights. That's effectiveness. That's a government solution. And when asked why I run for office, as I travel around the 56 counties, and they say, what's the difference? Why are you doing what you're doing? And I'm saying, as the government grows bigger, we lose our freedoms. We lose our opportunity. And I look at the next generation, and I say, do you think, when I have my town hall meetings, you're better off than your parents and grandparents? And everybody puts their hand up and says, yeah, we are. And when I ask the second question, do you think your children are going to have the same opportunity, are going to be better off than you? And they say no. And usually they say because the government is growing so large. They're making decisions that don't make sense. That we want to have an opportunity to prosper and grow like you did, Dad, like you did, Grandpa. Why can't I? What is with the EPA? Or what is with the Dodd-Frank? And why are these regulations coming down? Why can't I borrow money for my business? Why can't I afford a home? Usually the answer is the government is getting in the way. They want to get between you and your doctor. They want to make a decision. Just ask the folks up in Lincoln County how easy it is to live under 11.9% unemployment because they can't do what they need to do to get into the forest and work because of the appeals. They can't get into the mines and they can't expand and grow because of regulations that are keeping them, a permitting process that is not allowing them that opportunity. Flathead Valley is the greatest opportunity because you've got an opportunity for manufacturing and clean industry, and you've got natural resources. I want to be a part of that. And I'm asking you, don't go down the old path. If you like the path we're on, the path that we've been under the last 6 years of growing government, that John Tester's your guy. But if you think and believe in freedom and prosperity, then I am asking for your vote for the United States Senate.